So you've just finished watching Susan's live webcast recording. Susan was a candidate in an earlier Certificate 4 course, but she's doing the same course as you. And as you just heard, Susan is currently a primary school teacher and she's looking at changing careers. So, and wanting to get into TAFE, teaching with early childhood. So we're in a position now to come down to the question about Susan's needs. And you can see here, I'm still giving you the answers at this very early stage, but that's helping you to navigate and understand our processes here. So the document that I've opened up is what's called an Assessor Guide. This is very similar to your version, except all of the answers have been highlighted in red text. And that's called benchmarking. So any assessor, even if it isn't me, would be able to pick up the Assessor Guidelines and we'd all reliably be able to make the same judgment on whether you were satisfactory or not satisfactory in your response. So you've probably noticed we've got the office use only in this column. That's obviously for your assessors. And, you know, if you get it right the first time, we're able to just tick you off. Obviously, if you didn't quite get there the first time, at the end, because everything's submitted in a one-job lot, we'd give you a quick email and say, look, you just need to go and review question XYZ. I'll give you a call in a couple of days' time. And, you know, I could then just go and verbally re-ask the question. And, you know, obviously you can see where all of the questions are going to link up to the YouTube documents anyway. So we can at least then give you a list of the ones that aren't yet satisfactory. You've got plenty of notice. Just maybe do a quick verbal recheck. And that's when, on a second attempt, we should then be able to tick you satisfactory. So that's what all of those little boxes are on the right-hand side. And you're understanding a little bit about the assessment process and how easy and effortless this course can be. So here, as I said, you need to answer question 2, the reason for Susan's training. So it is a little bit tricky. In her current workplace, if you were listening, she was a primary school teacher, so she wouldn't be able to use her vet skills in primary school because it's really about workplace learning, and primary school children really aren't or shouldn't be in the workplace at this stage. So it is for Susan to change careers and or gain employment would be the correct response to that. Once again, you would just highlight that, please, and hit the highlight button. If yours isn't set to yellow, you can just set it to yellow up there. I'm just going to take that off now, stop highlighting. Okay, question 3 is, what's the purpose of assessment for Susan? Well, she really, because she's a teacher, she needs recognition of her prior learning. There's no need in the vet system to make it bogged down and methodical. In fact, they encourage people to provide lots of evidence so we can offer recognition and avoid the costliness and the timeliness of training and assessing. And it's also for her to develop competency. She wants competency towards her Certificate 4 qualification. So you'll notice here, this is our first little icon. This is our first piece of product, our first document that you'll be submitting. So on your form it's going to be blank. I'm just going to open up the Assessor Guideline now, which will help guide you and take you through what's expected for a satisfactory response in this. So you'll have a blank one here, and you need to put in for the qualification for Susan. You need to put in the qualification code, which is TAE 40110. Now let me also explain to you the breakdown of this. So as a trainer and assessor, you're being able to identify coding in the training packages that you teach. So the TAE is for the industry code. So that's your education code there. The 4 represents the AQF level, the Australian Qualification Frameworks level. So this is a Certificate 4, and you can see here it's indicated by that. Now 01 means it's the first version, and that was released in 2010. Okay, and this is a Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment. So you have the qualification code, and then you have the descriptor. Now underneath that is the competency. We have the competency code, and you have the competency title. So there are 10 units of competency to make a Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment qualification. So we're now looking at one of those units of competency. This is one of 3 electives, and it comes from, see how it's not from the education, training and education package? It's actually from the business package. But it is an elective, and it is an allowable elective. You can have one elective outside of the TAE range, and this one's called Make a Presentation. So we're going to determine whether Susan can receive recognised prior learning for this one elective. I mean, she's a teacher. You would surely think that she's making presentations all day long, PowerPoints, you know, working on the whiteboard, you know, speaking to people all day. So let's just pop down and have a little look at this. You will need to fill out this information, so you can pause the YouTube at any time. On a different device, I recommend that you open up your blank template just by double clicking on that Word document that I had open. You'll see there that you've just double clicked on it. And the first part of the process is this is in consultation with the learner. Okay, so this is negotiating with them about the timing and all of the circumstances. So you complete the plan between the candidate and the assessor. And so we need to talk about the purpose and the outcomes, all right? And we can record those down here. So you need to say, according to that question and answers that you've just filled out, that the purpose of the assessment for Susan right now is to recognise prior learning and to determine competency for a qualification. So you might want to pause this again and just fill out that section. Right. Now you're going to make sure that you've talked about the relevant units of competency with the candidate. So I will have discussed with Susan, look, we're looking at giving you a recognised prior learning for one of the electives. You need 10 units of competency to make up your Certificate 4 qualification. So right now we're going to look at planning your recognised prior learning of this one elective unit, make a presentation. Now we also have to discuss with the candidate the appeals process. Now on this particular form, and the RTO registered training organisation, that you will work for as a trainer and assessor will have their own designs of documents. But look, we're just going to go down and see on this current Evoke one, we have the assessment complaints or appeal procedure. Now this is quite relevant to you as a future candidate as well, so it's good information for you. Candidates have the right to challenge the assessment decision made by the assessor. Now you might just want to give this to Susan and, you know, in a make-believe scenario here. So if you were using this assessment plan for any of your candidates, you just say, look, I want you to go ahead now and read through this procedure, and I'd like you to actually stop the video and have a quick read through this yourself so you understand. Now, yeah, so you've gone through the appeals. Please excuse the zooming. The appeals process, you get the candidate to read that at the bottom. Then there's a confidentiality and security of information. So you're explaining to your candidate that the information that you provide, which includes, personal information like contact, phone numbers, emails, it's on a needs-to-know basis. So it would be the assessor, perhaps a supervising assessor if they're working under one, and just the RTO staff would have access to that on a needs-to-know basis. There is some reporting, but details like your contact details aren't given to ASQA. So, it really is on a very tight need-to-know basis there. And then you've got your special needs. So we'll have a look at that with Susan in a minute. This is a negotiation, and we're trying to work out any reasonable adjustment for her. So yours will be blank. You'll just put in, we're just respecting Susan's security of information, the real Susan, and we've just called her Susan Jones for intents and purposes, and we've put in some fake phone numbers there. So type in Susan Jones. Type in your name as the assessor's name because this is your first piece of evidence. She hasn't got an employer. She's paid to do the course herself. So the employer isn't a client. It's just Susan, the learner, as a client. And the location of the assessment, you can type in here Susan's residence via teleconference. So you might want to pause and just fill in this amount of information. Pick a date. Any date for the assessment date, and make sure it's the same as the date you've agreed upon down the bottom. And look, let's just pick a time, 6 p.m. for the teleconference. And there won't be an industry specialist required. That's usually if there's licensing needs, but that is beyond the scope of this qualification. So you've got your purpose of assessment you can fill in. We'll get back to this part, which is why it's in black and available to you already. The context is to recognise prior learning. Now, you can type in some instructions to the candidate. Because she actually isn't doing any performance or producing any questionnaires as part of training, we're actually just recognising current evidence that she's got. Her instructions are going to be to email her current teacher registration because she is a school teacher, third-party reports. So a third-party report is a form of evidence from an employer or a work colleague. So we're asking for a couple of third-party reports there. And samples of recent PowerPoint presentations. Okay, so we can see here under her portfolio, we might actually put her CV as well there. Okay, her curriculum vitae, you might want to call it a resume. So we're mapping out now what the assessment methods are. So she's building up a portfolio of evidence, and she's going to email us her current teacher registration, some PowerPoint samples, her CV, and we'll also down in the supplementary evidence get 2 third-party testimonials, please. Now these blank boxes, they're not applicable because she's already providing evidence. This isn't, she isn't doing training in this particular one, so there's no practical demonstration at this point that we're observing. The evidence is really strong here for Susan. You've got to look at your evidence holistically, and because she has a current teacher registration, there's rigorous assessment that teachers undergo to make sure that they remain competent anyway. So certainly for presentation in this particular unit, that's going to be a very strong piece of evidence. If you had Joe Bloggs off the street and all they were providing was a third-party testimonial from their spouse, from their wife, say, that's a fairly weak piece of evidence. So that's when you might, as part of your recognised prior learning, just ask them to give you a quick practical demonstration or put together a few 40-minute presentations where they've used a PowerPoint or something and sent it through to you. So, you know, you're really looking at the evidence holistically. Now, depending on what she sends through, I've just left this blank. We may want to ask her a couple of questions, and don't forget, questions are a very strong form of testing the knowledge. So we will get back to that one soon when we start mapping and looking at that training package there. All right, so all you need to do under resources is that she has access to email, telephone, printer and scanner. Just type that one in. And look, you can copy that as well. This is now what we're talking about with the allowable adjustments. We're going to assist Susan with her visual impairment. We're just under this case study suggesting that Susan has a problem with her sight. So, you know, reasonable adjustment is something that's reasonable for the trainer and assessor or the registered training organisation that they work for. So it can't cost a lot of money, nor can it cost a whole lot of labour and time of the trainer and assessor. Any costs really have to be from the employer if they've sent the person along for training, or the learner themselves. So in this case, it was fairly reasonable to make sure that the assessment plan or any information was sent electronically, so that way Susan can adjust the font size or the view, I guess, the Zoom view, so she could look at it in a much larger text, for example, if she needed to, and then she could just move across here. So I'll put that zoom back to 100%. Now, finally, you can pick the same date as the one that you've used up the top. Now, you can just put in your name there as the assessor. Obviously, you may not have access to an electronic signature of your own. I'm very happy for the purposes of this assessment just for you to put per and then just type in your name, and then today's date's great. You'll see that with an assessment plan, because it's been negotiated between the assessor and the candidate, it says the candidate's signature confirms understanding and agreement with the assessment process. And because e-learning is the big thing now and it's difficult to get electronic signatures, they have a choice of either printing out a hard copy, signing it, scanning it and printing it and getting it back to you, or simply just sending you an email, quick confirmation. Okay, so you don't have to go through this process, please. This is just showing you an electronic version of an option, so that's already ticked for you. So we'll just leave that as a random date that it was sent. Okay, but in a normal situation it would be your email address, and then the actual date you could then type in that they sent their acknowledgement of the assessment plan. You would have emailed it to them in an attachment, they'd read it, and they emailed you back and said, yep, I agree with that, that sounds fantastic. All right, so that is pretty much what an assessment plan is. It caters for the client's needs, it identifies the purpose of assessment, it gets all of the contact details in case, you know, we need to resubmit that, have them resubmit their evidence if it's not quite satisfactory. They understand all of these processes, so it's clear and fair for them as well.